Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is a lore video, as you can see from my lore background. I'm with the Twitch chat, and I'm going to be breaking down the Ravaged Coast book, okay? Now, you might be asking yourself, what the hell is this? So, if you're a rules person, and most of the people who do subscribe to me online are rules people, it's also this is the rules on how you would do Path to Glory, which is the kind of, I'm going to say narrative, but the best way of actually describing it is the creative storytelling device for being able to play inside Age of Sigmar. It's not D&D, that's not quite accurate, but if you wanted to be able to like generate your own warbands, characters, and such, that's why you'd be playing Path to Glory. They don't quite have the same ecosystem and campaign system as something as like solid as something like Necromunda, and obviously D&D and other things are a far cry away from what this is. However, the bit that I'm interested in, and maybe I will break down the Path to Glory bit as well in the future, the bit I'm interested in, and the point of this video, and any other lore videos that I'll be making in the future, I have already made one previously, made the Cities of Sigmar lore video, and I'd love you to let me know if you enjoy this process, and you enjoy these videos. So comments below if you want to watch it. But the reason that we are going to be breaking down the Ravaged Coast lore, and reading about it, and kind of like having a look inside of it, is because this is the narrative expansion after Age of Sigmar 4's launch. Age of Sigmar 4's launch was this kind of apocalyptic doom situation, very similar to what you saw in 9th edition 40k, where you had the whole of the universe, kind of, or galaxy at least, in 40k rent in two, and you had like the dark side and the light side. Similar thing has happened during Age of Sigmar 4. So, but not quite to the entire kind of Imperium. Instead, Age of Sigmar 4, Age of Sigmar is broken up into 8 different realms. There are also sub-realms. There's realms between realms. There's also under-realms and a bunch of other stuff which we could talk about in the future. But for Age of Sigmar 4, at least, we return to the realm of Akshi, and this is a map of the realm of Akshi. This is the realm of fire, and as you can see, very similar to our 40k brethren, this map has been rent in two. So the battle for Hellcrown was Age of Sigmar 4's launch, where the Skaven, as you can see to the east of the map, emerged and took over like a significant portion of this realm. Then there's a kind of like mountain range, the adamantine chain here, where they've been kind of held back, and now there's this perpetual war across the two. That was the battle for Hellcrown, and now the Ravaged Coast book is, hopefully, and I'm recording this before I've actually read the book, so this is not going to be one of those videos where we review it after we've read it. We're going to be learning as we go, which is actually quite a fun thing that we do when we stream and we do this together. So I quite like it as a process, and it's really engaging. But it does mean that my opinion is going to change as the book goes on. But this is going to focus on a section called the Ravaged Coast, and this is our saying. And and it's also going to be what happens after Hellcrown, because the Skaven attack, cool, you know that happened. They take over a portion of the land. All right, I understand that too. What happens next? That's what this book, I think, is going to tell us, or maybe should be telling us, because I'm guessing, and if you don't know, if you've never tuned into Age of Sigmar 4 lore or know anything about the lore, there has been consistent progressive story where normally there's a big kind of apocalypse at the start with some sort of like a big issue. We've had the Soul Wars previously where people were literally battling for souls. This is now going to be a battle for the actual land, which is interesting. Okay, so the first 2 pages are a little bit nothing burgers, really. The first page, the Ravaged Coast, starts to describe everything that you can see on this map, and about like the kind of atrocities that are occurring, and the fact that generally it's just a terrible place to live. You know, everything's on fire, everyone's dying, horror and monsters and everything, yet somehow people, you know, still fall in love and kiss. But they don't mention the fall in love kissing because it's Games Workshop. Horror, body horror, murder, death, destruction, fine. Kissing, no. Absolutely not a part of it. So this first page is literally a bit of a nothing, but is actually quite awkward because it goes on to describe a lot of stuff that's here, but then has this kind of like absolutely useless map where the map, they go on to describe everything in this map. They could have just put the map there, which I think is very, very weird. And like it's a bit unhelpful because as we were reading through this, we were like, "Ooh, okay, where is the Nor?" And it doesn't show you, so it's kind of annoying. But then on page 2, it starts to talk about, again, the rats and how they invaded and what they did. So it just kind of re-goes over what happened with the Vermin Doom. So that's when the rats invaded. A lot of people call it the Raticalism, which I think is very cool. So that's what we've been calling it. But then it goes on to describe the fact that there are two main resources that people are trying to get from entering into the Great Parch. So over here, kind of in the center of the map, as you start to go towards the east, there's this kind of mountain range. People are going over there because this giant vermin doom, the destruction of the land, the ripping of the land, because the rats literally emerged from underneath, has rent open great like treasures that were long buried. You have to remember that Age of Sigmar is a post-apocalyptic setting. What happened is there was a kind of like, I guess, pretty cool place. Then a guy called Sigmar turned up, collected a bunch of people together, created a pantheon, then built civilizations across all the different realms. Then eventually chaos came, and chaos ripped the place to pieces, and all of the realms were invaded by chaos and destroyed. It's a post-apocalypse, right? And those civilizations that existed before were like, you know, this kind of gilded golden age with like magics and powers and things only the stuff of legend really could dream of. And the apocalypse was centuries long. So buried beneath, and even in the time of the golden times, there was great treasures that were buried because they were too bad or whatever it might be. So you're looking at a land that is full of kind of like secret treasures, long forgotten, all sorts of things that they've never put out, which obviously gives Games Workshop and the writers really great narrative device, because at any point they can, from the land can emerge some long begotten treasure or paradigm shifting kind of machine or whatever they want to be able to like move things around, which is cool. So brave adventurers with their caps and a daring attitude are going over to the east to try to find as many treasures as they can. The two, and on page 2, it starts to describe the two kind of main things that they would really like to grab. They'd like to grab this thing called Emberstone. That is a magic stone. Every realm, there are 8 realms, has it like not the personification, the kind of materialization of its magic stuff. They're like, this is the magic of the realm of fire, and it's in obviously some sort of physical form. Finding that, you know, a couple of stones of that, and you could become as rich as a king. It's very rare stuff, but it's very expensive. You know, you would see a bunch of people maybe at the weekends with some metal detectors along the shorelines of the coasts of Sigmar, and then trying to find themselves some Emberstone. The other type of stone that also exists is Warpstone, which obviously the Skaven bring with them. So because the Skaven exist in a non-realm-like place, so underneath the realms and in kind of shadow pocket realms, you know, everything's magic in this universe, exists the Skaven, and they gnaw through the material of what the realms are, like the magical material of what the realms are, and that's how they kind of emerge into invasions and stuff. But they have a material called Warpstone, and that Warpstone, again, is their kind of magic essence, like physically created, and that is also another thing that they can find as well. It did lead us, me in the chat, to say that it's a little bit disappointing that Games Workshop don't do things with that. Like, it would be incredible to have like a bunch of like pistoliers that use Warpstone, or a cannon that use Warpstone instead, and it's got some special rules. That would feel like a true regiment of renown in comparison to what we see Games Workshop produce. But I guess the point of their very broad storytelling is so we can start to immediately fill those gaps. That's what they want. They want it to be as broad as possible, so we can say to ourselves, oh, it'd be cool if there was a really fun, you know, like a good Warpstone unit, or, you know, like some human assassins, but they got Warpstone blades or something similar. That would be really fun. But obviously they don't do that themselves. And I think that's kind of maybe the strength and weakness. Games Workshop are always super broad with what they give you. But then obviously being creative people, you build minis, you paint minis, you tell stories yourselves, you start filling in these gaps. So that's the first 2 pages. They're quite broad and they don't really tell you much. They're like, there's a place, and there's some stuff people want from the place. Maybe that's enough, but we don't really know about the consequences of the Hellcrown battle yet. We don't know what has happened to some of the cities and stuff, so hopefully we'll find that out. So after setting the scene of like kind of where we are, and also like maybe some motivation for our different forces and armies and such, we then get a couple of vignettes, some little insight. Shout out to Tristan for the term vignette. Some little very small single pages, half pages really, describing like certain characters doing basically nothing. This one on the left is just a guy being eaten by rats. I guess it's also meant to give us some sort of, again, small snapshot of what the world looks like, but I'm still waiting for some crunch, really. Now we get into, I think, where we're at, which is the crunch. The first page, we start reading about Hell's Claw. Hell's Claw is located on this part of the map. Shout out to Optimal Game State for getting me a better map here. So the adamantine chain, this chain of mountains, as I talked about here, is kind of like the physical and also like territorial bulwark, stopping Skaven from invading the rest of the realm. Inside the Skaven territory is a place called Hell's Claw, which used to be, during the apocalypse, was where Khorne and Khorne's legions set up a gladiatorial arena where countless millions of battles would be held, and a trillion souls would die, and the floor ruined with its blood, and all other, obviously, ostentatious ways of just saying there was lots of fights there. And then during the reclamation, during like Sigmar's invasion and trying to take these lands back, it was recaptured and was made an outpost by the Sigmarite forces. Then during Age of Sigmar 4's launch and the Vermin Doom, it was obviously retaken by, well, it was taken by the Skaven, not retaken by Skaven, taken over by the Skaven, but was kind of held at bay there. They didn't necessarily fully take it. And so many different armies, it says, many different types of nations and factions are battling at Hell's Claw. It's kind of the crucible, which is obviously a nice kind of like narratorial nod to, like, you know, its inception in the past. And obviously this is a point where they're all battling, and they're battling there because of two main reasons. Number one, it's seen as a strategic location that's super important. It's seen as like the kind of beachhead into the north, so where all the Skaven are, or back into the realm of fire, the other way. And also it's flooded with both Emberstone and also Norstone. So there's loads of like the key materials for what people want to go and get are located here. And so it just describes that as being a pivotal place of where people are doing some battle. Next, it goes on. I think we're going to get to start to look at a variety of different spaces and places that exist in and around where the Hellcrown is. And the first one that we find out about is the Brazen Skull Volcano. This is actually pretty cool because it really gives you some insight into Age of Sigmar's kind of like everything is magic and everything is alive and everything is a part of the existence of Sigmar, of the realms themselves. So the volcano is described, and the volcano is described as having, like, you know, effectively a soul, or at least it has its own kind of natural magic, same as a forest would. And there are many cultures, obviously, on Earth who like worship volcanoes, or it's part of their folklore or their traditions or whatever it might be. So it's not necessarily like it's quite like not common, but at least like it has some grounding in stuff that happens. But during the apocalypse, when the Khorne forces, invaded this area, they corrupted the soul or the nature of this volcano by sacrificing 8,000 gory sacrifices to the volcano. Very specific, 8,000. Obviously, that's the number of Khorne. And then they desecrated the volcano, right? And then it started to pour forth molten brass, and boiling liquid came out of it instead of its like more natural kind of just regular magma. Then we find out, and then they also covered it in like weapons and Emberstone and stuff like that. Then we find out that when the Skaven finally took over this region, they also were able to further pollute it, which is interesting. And then it was able to then produce even more kind of like toxic and chaotic and corrupted elements from it. So I guess it's like turning an engine into something that's only producing and making evil. Because obviously it's the realm of fire. These volcanoes aren't going to stop erupting ever. They're going to just constantly kind of like erupt, and they're kind of like it would be the same way as if you went to the realm of life. You would expect there to be only forests and marshes, and like life would be teeming. In the realm of fire, volcanoes and fire and ruptures and things like this are teeming, but they're an intrinsic element of it, apart from these corrupted ones. And that's quite cool, actually. I really like that. I like that. It gives the setting more kind of like individual magical realism. Like everything is Everything is magic all of the time, every element, even the rock that you're on could be corrupted by good or evil. It's kind of fun. Another place that we find out about in this kind of on the map, just to the right of Hellcrown or to the east of Hellcrown, is the Flotilla's Scramble. So the story goes on to describe that when the Skaven like emerge from the ground, the Vermin Doom occurs, and a bunch of humans, all types of people, try to escape, and they get aboard galleons and skiffs and a bunch of other places to try to escape away from the Vermin Doom. However, so raucous are the seas, and so much is like the magic that emanates from this kind of like cataclysmic rifting. Because I guess the Vermin Doom isn't just like a singular physical explosion. It's kind of like an instant corruption of a huge portion of land. And then the magics that are unleashed, and getting the idea that volcanoes even can have their own spirits and be kind of these things you can turn on and off and corrupt and these other things. It gives you some insight into like the kind of pure, it was described as gravitas, but the sure like eminence of magic that exists. So as it turns to the Skaveny chaos, the seas betray them, the ships are crashed into each other, they're flipped, and everyone kind of drowns and dies. But ever since then, those ships have been coalesced together in a kind of graveyard, a ship graveyard of all of the flotillas and hulls, and all put together in the Flotilla's Scramble, and that's where they exist. And they're obviously amongst all of the wreckage. Also, as the people were trying to escape, they were also being turned into rat men or corrupted like semi-rat men. So the magic was so strong that literally they would like break out and become rats. So that's how futile the attempt to escape was. And then obviously all of the treasures and things that they were trying to escape with is rich picking ground for trying to go and find yourself some loot, some good old pirate treasure, do a bit of a Goonies. But obviously, at any point, there's a rat that's trying to stab you in the skull. So you got to be a little bit careful in the Flotilla Scramble. But so far of the places, it's probably the place I'm most excited about because I love a good pirate adventure. I like the idea of pirate rats, obviously. Again, you could give yourself a good bit of backstory. If you were doing a Skaven army, you could get a bunch of your clan rats, you can give them little pirate hats, and you can say that they used to hang around the Flotilla Scramble. Gives you a good bit of world building. The next place it goes on to talk about is the Burning Bridge. So up at the north here, so much above the Brazen Skull volcano, we've got this Burning Bridge, which, as you can see, the mountainous range leading to the Skaven lands is a pivotal choke point between the Skaven attempting to invade and then being pushed back. It goes on to describe that that part of the world is held by a host of Stormcast and Lord Commander Bastian Carthalos himself a legend, along with his Stormcast, and also a bunch of Fire Slayers are also there to help hold the line, as well as hordes of Free Guild humans and a bunch of Flagellants as well, who apparently make pilgrimages to this area to throw themselves in this tumultuous like battle line that's been drawn. Twice the Skaven have tried to invade, and twice they've been pushed back at that point, and with a third one apparently on the horizon. So the next part of the book just goes on to describe the bits between. I like that they were able to last three places in description before they were like, back to generalizations. Generally around this, on the map you can see just above my head here, generally around this area, bad stuff. Yeah, the magic of Skaven are... So the realms themselves are consistently magic. So the seas are constantly boiling or changing and shifting in some ways. Some people would ask how you ever even build a home in areas like this, but I guess maybe you don't. And then with the Skaven magic adding into it, like anything could happen. Magma could pop through a cavern that you were hiding in. Rats could emerge. You might just get drowned out. And all the while, roving bands, so all around this kind of coastal region here, roving bands of adventurers, marauders, glory hunters and fame seekers and fortune seekers are running around, and you're constantly needing to battle against them as well. So, you're trying to, it's a bit like Takeshi's Castle in many ways. You're trying to get to the end, but just all sorts of insanity is happening the entire time, and none of it makes any sense. So that they go on to describe that, in some detail, but again, pretty wishy-washy. I don't know if I've mentioned it yet in this video, but I want to make a small correction, an apology about this. I have said that actually, this is actually a super frustrating book because there's no map, but that's not true. If you were to get the actual book, there's a fold-out map that comes with it, so you can track all the places that we've been talking about. So as you were reading the story, you can fold out your giant map and you can trace your fingers along it, be like, yes, the Chakrik's Folly as an example. So there is a fold-out map, which is very cool, and I would say very necessary. So that's very fun. The next place we find out about in this kind of region of interest is Chakrik's Folly, which is just to the kind of east of Hell's Claw, west of Hell's Claw, and then near Emberguard. So it's at the bottom of the Adamantine chain. So previously, before the giant incursion of Skaven, this was already a Skaven stronghold. This was where Chakrik, a Gracier, was attempting to build like a warpstone engine to literally deconstruct the nature of the realms themselves. So like an apocalypse doom weapon. But Chakrik's Folly obviously did not succeed. But the reason it did not succeed was not because it was a bad idea to create such a weapon. It was actually because a famed warlord of the Dark Oath, Gunnar Brand, and a bunch of his Dark Oath descended from the Snowy Peaks, you can see there, just above Chakrik's Folly, and was able to take them out and like defend the realms and defend our defend the very lives of everyone who exists. Now, since the Vermin Doom, it has become a point of contention. It's not what it once was. It kind of got decimated. Still, many rats live there, but it's a really important foothold, or could be an important foothold for the Skaven trying to invade further into the realm. But right now, it's not used as such, and instead is a kind of wasteland of potential doom. So the next place it goes to describe is probably one of the most important places, the Hell Crown. So the Hell Crown is kind of right here, right next to Hell's Claw. So this is kind of an interesting bit of lore from the past. So the Hell Crown had an active volcano. It was an area of land where Khornate forces, especially, would go because they felt like it was like the embodiment of like the kind of raucous nature of Khorne, and was dangerous and evil and very difficult to get to. There was a volcano there, and the Sigmarite forces wanted to take that area back. They marked it for reconquest. So they used both geomancy and electrokinesis, which I think also is something to do with crystals that you could do in your house. So it's not necessarily just a Sigmar thing. Anyway, they used that to compel the volcano at the island's heart to erupt, wiping out all of the bloodbound forces, or the Khornate forces that were there. Then it was settled by mortal settlers, and a fortress was constructed, and for 3 years they held out. Then, when the Vermin Doom happened, and like the Skaven obviously were able to potentially try to take it over, this became like a crux, like a battleground where different forces, both like Sigmarite forces as well as many others, would be heading there to try to tip the balance between either Skaven or the other forces in either way, and it becomes again another central battleground for this kind of like, absolute like cornucopia of central battlegrounds along this coastal region. So this, we know that the land itself literally is boiling and rebelling, but also forces are all descending into this singular location to try to sway the battle one way or the other. Okay, coming back to this book, it's been pretty exciting. The next few pages of this book were the Saga of Varkar, which is a long-winded, quite badly written tale about Varkar, Varkar Dreadaxe specifically, who takes some of his warriors, his chaos followers, and he goes and attacks some Skaven. This is pretty fun to read if you put some like epic fantasy battle music on, and could even be super cool if it became like a metal album. But right now, reading it just plain off the page, pretty awful, to be honest. But then we start getting into something pretty cool. We start reading about Fate's Black Anvil. don't forget, we're in the Ravaged Coast, and we start finding out about Ormla Ashcrown, Lord Celestin of the Anvils of Heldenhammer. And from her perspective, we start to get the tale. She writes the tale of their kind of attack into the Ravaged Coast and what's been happening. So the first date, the 17th of Windscal, year of the Verminous Woe, she tells how she talks about how she was crafted. Many centuries ago, I was a chief of my clan. That was until a black blade cut me down beside the late waters of Lake Pier, a wicked thing, a one that hell's awareness. And then such is the way until the God King clad my soul in blackened plate. So it was that Orma, chieftain of the Yor, became Ormala Ashcrown. So if you don't know how Stormcast are formed, Stormcast souls, the human souls, I think they're all human, but souls anyway. What happens is when some heroic soul dies, sometimes Sigmar will snatch their soul out. Sometimes people will plea for it, but sometimes they won't, and oftentimes they won't. So it's kind of like indentured servitude. And then reforges them and turns them into Stormcast. That's effectively how they get made. And that's where the energy. And then what happens is they obviously get sent to go on for Sigmar and fight Sigmar's battles. They're not like automatons. They do have a lot of free will, but the reforging is like, we definitely love Sigmar and he's definitely our guy. So there's definitely also some brainwashing that occurs there as well. And I think if we were to really break down the Stormcast story, it's actually quite interesting. And it might be, I'm not saying it is, but it might be a conversation about modern soldiery and the concept of what happens to soldiers. When you become a soldier, you go through basic, you go through quite a lot of, I don't want to say mind warping, but you do get some level of discipline and indoctrination instilled in you, because that's the process of and some would even argue some level of dehumanization that happens to you to become an effective piece of the military. And I think that's what happens really with Stormcast. That's the idea of the reforging, is they're like, look, they strip away some elements of who the person was and they make them a soldier that will, fight for this cause no matter the issue. And then it becomes super interesting when they die, because when they die, they get reforged again, and then they lose a piece of themselves. And if you haven't been keeping up with modern Age of Sigmar 4 lore, the conclusion of this is that when they get reforged enough times that they become basically someone that doesn't really know who or what they once were, they get retired to the bleak citadels, which is kind of like an old people's home, really, where they're kind of looked after, which I think is, again, an interesting reference to, the reforging sounds a lot like PTSD, and the concept of, the effect of war and deployment and a bunch of other stuff on these like soldiers. And then when they eventually get too unable to fulfill their role, they get quote unquote looked after, which again could be like a real indictment on the very lackluster work that society does in looking after people who have been in conflict zones of war. Because we have really poor social services for veterans and a bunch of refugees and a bunch of other people who have been in conflict zones and wars, and we don't do that very well. And I think maybe that's an indictment on it, to be honest. And then now with the Skaven Doom, and if you haven't been keeping up with it, with the Skaven Doom and all of the warp energies and everything that's happened, they've gone back to the Bleak Citadel. They've taken all of these super hyper PTSDs, don't know themselves warriors who are like languishing in these Bleak Citadels, and then they've sent them to attack the Skaven on the Ravaged Coast as well as other places, because the energies of the Skaven magics and energies don't affect them as much because there's not enough of the person to affect, which I think is this might be a little bit of a reference to, the classic, like, I'm too old for this shit. One more, or it might even be like a throwback to like Rambo. Rambo's there like in a peaceful village, like chopping some wood, and they're like, we need you back, Rambo. Yeah, the Expendables chamber. That's a good way of putting it. So Stormcast are complicated, and so reading from the perspective of a Stormcast is really interesting, and there are many really interesting stories. Okay, so then what we go on to find out is that Ormala wades through Lethis, and then she quite coolly actually describes that even though she is she's a Lord Celestin at the Anvils of Heldenhammer, she doesn't describe herself as a Cryptborn or a Galmorian or a Steel Soul. So that's obviously a reference to Ionis Cryptborn and Garda Steel Soul and Galmorian, who was a famous one of the chambers. Oh God, what were they called? Anyway, one of those chambers, the ones that got deleted. And it's cool that even inside the Stormcast Eternals, like army and ranks, there are soldiers and heroes that are a cut above the Sacrosanct Chamber. So the Galmorian were from the Sacrosanct Chamber. There's a army that's from there are soldiers and heroes that are even above your Lord Celestins, a rank that you would think is quite high up already. So that's pretty fun and interesting as well. So then we go on to find that her path returns to Akshi, inevitably, perhaps for fate oft proves cynical. We strike into the Nor. So the Nor is where the Skaven popped up. Her sentinels of Pyre were wounded in a war against the Geese of Helgeis, and I endured my 4th reforging. So that's when they die, and then they're sent back to Azir, reforged, and they're sent back down. So they remember their reforgings. And each Stormcast is different. Some Stormcasts probably can handle hundreds of reforgings. Some Stormcasts probably can only handle a couple, and then they fall to pieces. And then we do not battle alone. Our brethren of the Ruination Chamber have emerged from their citadel. Their Lord Vigilant Mortmarion on his Corvid steed, so his crow steed. This is just some quite clear product placement. Shout out to Marcus in the chat who pointed it out. And this is a lot of what the writing and prose that Games Workshop produces for their stories is product placement. It's like, by the way, how cool is it the Ruination Chamber can avoid the Mac? And you're like, oh my God, they're so cool. And they hype them up because it's basically just a big document about sales, which is fine because there is some also really interesting, like, I think, conversations and at least like ideas that are thrown around as well. The next piece just talks about the fact that they go and find some Skaven and they smash some Skaven. Cool. And then they eventually go and talk about the fact that they're getting in the second of the Darkening, they get deeper in to where the Ratocalypse happened and all the Skaven are sitting. And at that point, they're finding it too difficult to fight. So the Stormcast previously aren't good enough now, and it's only the Ruination Chamber. So those old Stormcasts that don't have much left going on in their heads are able to like resist the energy and the magic of this kind of like dark area and this Skaven raw area. So again, it's just kind of like they're better than us now. They're a better version. We've had to call on. It's kind of interesting. Like if you were to do like a 40k thing, it would be like the Space Marines are getting the better Space Marines to come and be. I guess it's like Space Marines getting the Custodes. And then eventually the Custodes are like, oh, we need to get the Primarchs. And Games Workshop does have this problem with the always increasing power level of something. Not talking about rules. They must always go up. Always. There's always something bigger and better, or there's always something worse and more awful, and they must always go up. And sometimes I feel like that they push themselves into a position where everything is like an 11 out of 10. And then if your normal is 11 out of 10, then that's a 5, right? But they can't go beyond that. And I think that is something. Anyway, let's keep going. The next part of our story for our character personae, our dramatis personae, is the command to send a unit of vigilers to go and look for a storm vault or rumors of a storm vault. So this is a really big deal from Age of Sigmar 2 and is kind of a crux and a backbone of Age of Sigmar's deep lore. Storm vaults are magical places. So, okay, we're in effectively the 4th age of Age of Sigmar. It might be in the 5th age of Age of Sigmar. But importantly, there was the time of myth, which is way, way back in the day, where there was great magics and things that could be crafted. Because we're in a kind of double post-apocalypse is where we are in the Age of Sigmar timeline. Yeah, it was the best of times. It was the most magical of times. And there were many powerful magics and items, and everyone was doing almighty things, etc. Then when Chaos came, it's the second age, so Age of Myth, I guess it was also the Age of Empire as well. So there was the Age of Myth, and then there was when all of the kind of civilizations would grow out of that Age of Myth. In fact, actually, there's Age of Myth and then the civilizations. So that's 2 ages. Then Chaos came, that was the Third Age, and they smashed all of the civilizations to pieces, okay? And they looted all of their stuff, and they desecrated loads of their stuff, and they did all sorts of like evil, horrible things. Then the Stormcast Eternals landed. This was several hundred years ago, now into the current timeline. They then beat loads of chaos up, and now there's like a kind of like 1 minute to midnight war between chaos and civilization again, where civilization is trying to like find its way in the world, pushing chaos back, trying to reclaim the lands, kind of like a Manifest Destiny sort of like allegory, I think, but like, you know, more heavy-handed, and a bit of colonialism thrown in as well. So all that's to say that when the Stormcast first landed second time, what they did was they created these things called Storm Vaults, where they would hide all of the great magic and loot or evil people. For instance, Catacross from Ossiarch Bone Reapers was originally hidden in a Storm Vault. So he was defeated, and then his body was locked in a Storm Vault. And then a Storm Vault is then magically, there's a kind of magical, it's called a dais. It's got a name to it. There's a, it's kind of like a tornado bunker, yeah. He then puts loads of stuff in a Storm Vault, loads of magic stuff, loads of cool things, and then he casts a spell, basically, to make it so that it vanishes. And everyone who ever remembered it forgets it, even Sigmar himself. They're just like locked away forever. Then, obviously, so it's lots of stolen artifacts. It's like the British Museum, right? Then what happens is during the Necroquake, which is something from Age of Sigmar 2? Age of Sigmar 2, Necroquake kind of like ripped several parts of the lands open, and some of the Storm Vaults are like burst open, and then, you know, then people are trying to jump in and steal all the stuff and find all these magic items. And at this point, it's quite clear the Stormcast are like, we're going to try and pop open the Storm Vaults, see if there's like a bazooka in there or something similar, maybe some rat repellent or whatever they can find. So it's quite a key part of the kind of web of the Age of Sigmar story, because these Storm Vaults are probably in the future going to be something that they use, or some like literary device that they use to just be like, and then there was a Kragnos in a Storm Vault or something similar, right? So that's what Storm Vaults are. And then they went to find a Storm Vault. They lost the people that were trying to look for the Storm Vault. And then we go on to find that our character is really struggling with her feelings in pushing on into the dark. So again, these are not necessarily like characters. I mean, bravery is only good if you're scared of something, right? Like, you don't need to be brave if you're not scared. But so they're brave characters who are pushing into places where they're dark, but also they are doubtful of the hope that they're pushing through. And also they are conflicted because they don't know if some of their actions are because they've started to succumb to the reforgings, which is another difficult thing as well. So they're constantly having to second guess themselves because of the process of becoming a soldier. I think that's quite interesting as well. So yeah, that's what the story's about. I think the last paragraph, or the last kind of section that we have from Ormala, our character, goes on to describe the fact that they're moving towards the hillock of Gritpile. I'm not sure yet, because I haven't read any further, if we're going to end up with several different like characters going towards Gritpile, which is in the Ravaged Coast, which is a Skaven edifice, a warpstone monolith that they're trying to topple. But we find out in the last few sentences that Ormala has got a secret other reason for attempting to go there. I feel a presence at Gritpile, old and unwelcome. It has nagged me for many days. The black blade that slew me endures. So the black blade was what originally killed her, all right? I know it. We are bound in some manner, for it sleeps beneath the monolith, waiting to be taken up. Should the Horde Masters claim it, woe shall follow as it did before. That I shall not allow, not a second time. I shall find the blade and end its curse. Perhaps then my grief shall finally abate, and I can strike for Hell's crown with a soul unmarred. Now, does she not do that? That's interesting. What also I think is interesting is that under the guise of doing something for Sigmar, for the greater good, actually she's dealing with that original trauma of why she ended up where she ended up. She's trying to undo it. And probably, like many of us will know, that'll end up being like a hollow victory if that ends up, because it won't be something that makes her soul be unmarred, because the process of being a soldier in Sigmar's army mars your soul. So that's an interesting kind of like hope that she has, an interesting like hope and goal, and also not necessarily doing exactly what's right for like the greater battle. Very cool, very interesting. The next part of the book, because we've just left our Stormcast character behind, and we've got a new character, a Flesh Eater Courts character, known as Duke Morfar. Now, Duke Morfar had a kingdom, a little dukedom, in the Adamantine Chain, which is the range of mountains protecting the Ravaged Coast. And then obviously Skaven happened, and all the Skaven exploded. And at this point, the Skaven started to attack into his kingdom, or his dukedom, and he was furious. But he kept losing courtiers, kept losing all of his serfs. If you are not up to date with the Flesh Eater Courts lore, the concept is pretty simple. They suffer such a grand illusion that humans and other kind of races eventually become ghouls, and they become literally flesh eaters. But they think themselves as noble knights. They think themselves as paragons of goodness, but all the things that they're doing is actually horrible, right? That's what's exactly happening. And the writing is in this particular section is also super interesting as well, because you get a very flowery, very kind of ostentatious sort of writing style. Then you get a much more descriptive, much more informative style, and then you jump between the two as if someone is jumping between like a delusion and not a delusion. So I think that at least is interesting. But the truth of it is, it's not really got much to say. What happens is the Skaven come. He's mad about the Skaven. He then does a couple of sacrifices, which they go into great detail to explain. Then they go, right, we're leaving where we are because there's too many Skaven, and we're going to go on a big old crusade. Then they eventually end up finding that Storm Vault that our previous character was trying to send some Stormcast in, with the Vigilers who they lost inside of it, the Storm Vault of Wickhallow. And then they attack the Stormcast, and I think they basically slay them. Then what we find out is one of the secret magical things that is inside the Storm Vault ends up being one of the elder sages of Aglor, whose empire was struck from the skies in days anon, and Morfar did devour his knowledge and take it unto himself. So this elder sage was eaten and consumed, and all of the magical knowledge was known by Morfar. Morfar then just like Morfar means grandpa in Danish. Thank you. That is cool to think to add. So then Morfar and his, I think, grandchildren then all just fly away, and they go towards Brazen Skull Mountain, which we talked about earlier in the video. And that's it. That's the kind of story. And there's loads of text. There's loads of information, but like not tons of, like, we're left with what the hell and who the hell were the elder sages of Aglor. We don't know that information. We just know that there's something magical that does exist. And sometimes these books do this. They just give you a little snapshot where they're constantly saying, hey, by the way, there's this model you can buy. There's this other sort of thing you can do. There's this other cool thing. By the way, they do describe endless spells and manifestations that you can summon, and then they're out there. So there are these vignettes, and sometimes I think it maybe would be, you could be really uncharitable and say they're only sales-based vignettes. They're also fun, and I think in some way, some interesting. This one less interesting than the Stormcast one. I quite like that Stormcast one. But, or they're just little small snapshots to give you some idea of to create something interesting in your own personal games. You'll have to let me know what you think. Now, the concept of writing a mission, Age of Sigmar doesn't really work where you can write a mission to go and attack a Storm Vault either. I guess you could just say objectives of Storm Vaults. That could be a fun thing to try and do in a kind of like narrative way. Anyway, that's our Flesh Eater Courts character. The next of our dramatis personae is Shaman Kazik. So this is a bunch of cruel boys, which seem to also have joined in league with a really weird little goblin shaman as well, which there's also, if we go on the next page, you can see there's a kit bash of the goblin shaman there, who's been kit bashed with some cruel boys elements, which I think is fun. We find out about our war boss here, which is super fun, and his little pot grot, his stab grot, who is also very, very funny. And it's just a back and forth between the Sump Dogs clan, who are camped out near the acidic rivers, and the fact that going into the Skaven Blight has been a pretty unnice and not a fun time for a bunch of these guys, and they're not too happy. They're also not happy with their leadership, and they're very much thinking about overthrowing their leader. But they do have a pretty fun, like I've said, shaman, grot shaman, who's got like the wisdom or like the magical knowledge to know where a good amount of loot is. And we eventually find out that this group of guys, Kazik and Zib and Skogrot, are all going eventually they're off to the mountain where we've seen the Flesh-Eater Courts head off to as well, because there's going to be some good loot. Grabbing loot's a good lark, but mucking about with Realmstone seems like a bad idea, apparently. So they're going north. They're going up to the mountain where Flesh-Eater Courts guys are going as well. So maybe what we're going to see is a coalesce. All of these different factions getting together. This one didn't really grab me very much. It was like a fun conversation. And yeah, orcs and grots talking with each other is always really funny. We also got some very fun kind of insults that were being thrown around as well. We found out he got a properly spruced up chopper. And what did he say? He said something about we're going to need to give their head a wobble or something. And also one of them is, there's some really good little insults in here as well. And they also said, grots is grots, okay, which is like a fun statement. The idea that grots cannot be anything but grots, which is cool. So fun, interesting. Not we don't learn much. They use the term gone wonky. He's gone a bit wonky, which is cool. We don't learn a lot. It's just, again, another vignette, a little fun little slice. But I did enjoy this because, truthfully, grots and crawl boys and all those things are just very, very fun. So, having met all of our dramatis personae, we are given this incredible scene, this 2-page spread of this battle for the blood of the monolith. Don't forget, there is that big Skaven chunk of rock, which all these three factions, specifically the Skaven and the Dark Oath and the Stormcast, are all battling for. Obviously, all for different reasons. And so we start the battle with the Stormcast having got there early and fending off many different like plague wretches and such. They've formed a defensive line around the monolith. They then are surprised and attacked when the Skaven and the Dark Oath team up together, with the Skaven casting a spell to like skitter-leap in and emerge with the units of Dark Oath, well, a horde of Dark Oath and some Storm Vermin, and they all rush at the Stormcast, surprising them. Don't forget, the Stormcast are trying to reach the monolith because their commander is trying to get the blade hidden underneath the monolith, which she was initially killed when she was in human before she became a Stormcast. So we get some back and forth, a little bit of fighting, nothing particularly cool. But when the skit leap does happen, we then do end up with a big fight between our main characters. Not Varkar Dradex. He doesn't get involved in the fight at all, and we never really find out what happens to the Dreadaxe. However, we do know what happens to him. Sorry, that's not true. But what happens is our main character, our Stormcast leader, she gets trounced by one of the Skaven. Nope, I apologize. She gets attacked by one of she gets attacked by Varkar himself. Varkar on his steed. They then run down our plucky Stormcast hero, but she gets knocked down. She loses her weapon. She gets defended by one of her Stormcast, who slays the beast. And then, just as she's about to get chopped down by Varkar, she reaches down and then pulls out the black blade that initially killed her and chops him in half. She then screams the retreat and then takes the obsidian sword and her forces and retreats from the battlefield with the blade still in hand. So she definitely has this goal, which is not the goal of the Stormcast. It's not the goal of Sigmar, which does raise some interesting questions. The reality is, are there many Stormcast out there who, propaganda would make us think are just going out and doing whatever they want? not doing exactly what they should do. They're doing all the good things. They're capturing the realm. They're dying for the realm. They're doing all the stuff that we would expect them to be doing. Or are there a ton of Stormcast commanders, as well as other kind of, heroic commanders, doing a bunch of nefarious, self-indulgent things, which could eventually lead to corruption? I guess this kind of falls into the fallacy of humanity, which is intrinsic in Games Workshop writing, where humans fail. Humans have base emotions. That's what gives rise to the Chaos Gods. And in this situation, even a heroic Stormcast Eternal Commander can fall to their basest desire and, go after something that means something important to them, which is okay. I mean, it's a lot of really crunchy and difficult to read pretext. And this is the end of our story. We no longer know what happens after this. There's no more inside this book. So maybe this character will see return in future books. Maybe it'll be a model that gets released in the future. But this is all that we get from finding out what happens here. And obviously, both the Skaven forces and also the Dark Earth forces really just play the role of kind of your Marvel masked bad guy, set up for the turn, set up for the movie to eventually fall at the end of the movie, which I guess is pretty common. But it would have been cool to maybe have seen the Stormcast fall. Maybe the Skaven or the Dark Earth could have got the blade first, and then she could have died again to the same dark blade, which would have been a fun kind of piece. She coveted it, but it eventually slew her. But we have a pretty atypical story here. Let's go find out what happens between the other two factions. Our next battle takes place on the Brazen Skull Volcano, which we talked about earlier. Don't forget. So it's a volcano that is that's been corrupted, ready to explode at any moment. We see that the Sump Dogs and everyone under Kha'Zix's command, who's our shaman, have got to the mountain first, and they are collecting as much Emberstone as they can, collecting all the loot and the gear, and they're feeling pretty good. However, the Emberstone is making them a bit surly, and some of the orcs have fallen into a little bit of a fight. And they're having a little bit of a dust-up, but not anything major, just a couple of scraps here and there, which is pretty orky anyway. However, it does seem that Kha'Zix has been a little bit suspicious of some of the other mobs and some of the other war leaders because he's been, especially Skogok, because they've all been like talking behind his back, and he's a little bit suspicious right now. But then that's all cut off when they hear a big scream. And then they see a horde of flying flesh-eater courts descending from the heavens. They're all charging in, they hear a big scream, and then the big vampire with a rusted blade is charging straight towards Kha'Zix. It's at this point, our man Zib, very clever, says to the arrow lads and the bolt boys, he's like, get some Emberstone on your arrows, shoots away, pops off some of the ghouls, and they set on fire, which is pretty fun. But eventually, we just descend into another duel between our vampire and also our Strigoi-like vampire, and also Kha'Zix, our shaman. The shaman has told the lads, bring as much Emberstone to me as you can. He starts sucking the energy out of the Emberstone to cast some magic. But as this duel happens, what happens is a bunch of the mobs grab Zib, and then they turn tail and run. They grab a bunch of the Emberstone, which is what they're there for, and off they go. They run away. And then Lee leaves Kha'Zix. This catches him, Kha'Zix. This catches him unawares, and then the vampire's able to grab a hold of him. It's at this point that Kha'Zix's like, I'm done with this. He sucks all the energy of the Emberstone inside of him, and then he does a colossal explosion of magic, wiping so many people out. It's at this point that the volcano is pleased at this display of martial prowess and rage, and it too explodes. We do not ever get to find out if Zib made it out alive, but hashtag pray for Zib. Let me know if you got this far in the video, and I'd be excited to know. And that is the end of all the lore inside this book. Now, I've recorded this over a couple of weeks, which is what I'm going to do with many of the lore videos. You'll have to let me know. It's meant to be kind of a recap. It's meant to be like a little look, and it's also meant to be so I could just read it and get my thoughts and feelings about it and what I think. And yeah, can I get some pray for Zibs in the chat, please? And also, I've been doing this while also talking with the Twitch chat. So I record this over a couple of hours where we just break down what's been happening. We talk about some stuff and, you know, we just generally kind of like look at what we think about it. There were some really cool vignettes. As a book, and this has been pointed out in the chat, this isn't a book that really pushes the story on. It does, I guess, start to set the scene of the Ravaged Coast and some of the locations inside the Ravaged Coast. It also gets to create some kind of cool ideas and looks at some certain factions, but also not many factions. So I think that's also something to point at too. Now, I know that this is just the front end bit of narrative before you get to the army creation part of what is Path to Glory, which is, I guess, quote unquote, the narrative, although it's a lot of rules, way of like building up little heroes and stories, little heroes to use in some like casual fun games, which is fine. We're not necessarily going to cover that. We're just going to take this as what it is. And the reason I looked at it, which is this is the bit of story moving on the story of what's happening in Age of Sigmar 4. And I don't know. This definitely is not worth like £30 or whatever the book may cost. I know this is only a portion of it, the lore. There's obviously also the Path to Glory book. And I know Games Workshop books are really expensive anyway. I would say that it felt quite disjointed. It was just a lot of setup for like some just okay fights, I guess, where nothing happened or changed. Like the stakes were low and they delivered on those low stakes. I guess we have a Stormcast character who's walked away. And Zib really is only a character because we've decided to make Zib a character, right? Like Zib is on our hearts, which I guess maybe is the point of books like this. We take little small sections of books like this and we create some additional story based on it. But am I really going to slog through this to get those moments? I guess that's the real question. I guess if you're someone who likes fantasy literature, this is bad. This is a bad book. If you're someone who doesn't like fantasy literature, you're probably not going to read this. As someone who likes fantasy literature myself, it's pretty uninspiring, and I don't think it really told me tons and tons. Like, there's so many things I'd like to see for books about Age of Sigmar from Games Workshop, like bestiaries, like in-depth details about different factions and where stuff exists. And I know what you can say to me, Rob, that exists inside the battle tomes, and we will cover battle tomes as well. I'd love to know what you think in the comments about what you'd like to see, and if you'd even like to see me cover this in the future, because some people might be like, some people maybe like haven't read these before and maybe don't even want to see me read them. I don't know. You'll have to let me know. But I would say that, like, I'm really excited to try to read something else. That's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to say that for me personally, if this hadn't been something I was doing for a video, I would have stopped way before this. And honestly, when the next one comes out, it's going to be a genuine effort to put myself through the process of reading this again. So, like, it wouldn't get a very high score from me. I don't really know what its purpose is either. I guess that's also the point. I guess its purpose is a vignette of some stuff happening in the Ravaged Coast at this specific point, which would be okay if it was like, I don't know, like a small PDF or like a small free thing they gave out. But a £30 book, it doesn't give me epic. Like, that's like almost a trilogy of novels in paperback from a bookstore or something. There's a lot there. There's a lot of money for not a lot. Like the art, there was no new art. There wasn't like a guide on how to build these characters. Kit bash them. We talked about that earlier. That would have been a cool thing to do. And most of the characters died. So all of these characters that we learned about no longer exist. There's no, like, you don't necessarily need there to be like a Skeletor kind of like, and we'll see you next week, kids. But also it would be like, okay, are we going to follow through these characters for the next 3 years? Maybe the next campaign we'll see them clash again and we will continue to see this. Or are we just going to visit the Ravaged Coast now once? That's it. We're done. No more talking about it in the future. Never think about it again. But I know I'll be thinking about something, and it'll be Zib. Thanks for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know. I'll see you guys soon.